Hey everybody, thanks for joining the ACM Working From Home webinar for the animation and visual effects industries. My name is Jessica Glass. I'm Production Technology Department Manager with DNEG in Vancouver. And this is actually the second in a series of webinars that are organized by the Canadian ACM SIGGRAPH chapters with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We have a few common ground rules to be covered just before we get started here. This is applicable to all participants, and I'll just run through them right now. So since this live stream is moderated by our team, we ask that all comments, of course, stay respectful of others and also respect ACM's policy against harassment. This means that participants are asked to exercise consideration and respect in all speech and actions, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and also be mindful of fellow participants. Naturally, with all this in mind, no intimidating, harassing, abusive, discriminatory, derogatory, or demeaning speech or actions by any of the participants will be tolerated. So, having said that, let's jump right into things and introduce our panel. We have today with us Troy Brooks, who is Vice President of Technology with Wild Brain Studios. Hello, Troy.
Hi, nice to be here.
Great to have you. We also have Chuck Peil, who is Executive Vice President of Strategic Partnerships with ReelFX Animation Studios. Hello, Chuck. Everybody. And we also have Ken Zorniak, who is President and CEO with Tangent Animation.
Hello.
Hi, Ken. So, let's just jump right into things here and start with a first question. Now that we've been doing this for about a quarter of the year, and just ask, on-site versus remote technology when it comes to pipelines and whatnot, what kind of stuff have you guys had to adapt to? We'll open the floor and maybe...
I'll jump in.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so pretty much everything. You know, when COVID hit and the timing, you know, obviously for everybody was challenging, we were in a pretty unique situation. We had 3 feature animated films going, 3 different studios, and each of the films were in 3 phases of production. So, you know, for us, we had to, when I say everything, I say that tongue in cheek, but at the end of the day, we had to look at it as a pivot for an end-to-end, you know, 3 different projects. So, you know, fortunately for us, if we look back 25 years ago, we started to, you know, remote workflow and remote collaboration was in our DNA. In the early days, it's because we couldn't afford to have animators on full time that we call them permalancers, people that we worked with remotely, and we've that is still part of how we operate. So, you know, our biggest issue probably across any of the departments was bandwidth, ensuring everybody that, you know, was in a work from home situation could effectively connect to their machine. So VNC with Teradici, other tools that we were employing, you know, our goal looking at this was how do you replicate the pipeline the best you can, be it remote or whether they're in the studio, and that's it. One of the things for us is we had a tool called Insight that it's more than a production management tool. It's something that we had created, and it's kind of DNA of our studio. It's how we push pixels. I would say that Shotgun is a version of some of that, but this was a tool that we've had in as part of our pipeline really from the beginning. So because that was a way that we communicated, the way we you know, had oversight of our projects and was tuned in the pipeline, it allowed us to pivot fairly quickly. And instead of there being 3 studios, Montreal, Hollywood, and Dallas, we kind of looked at it as 400 little studios that all had to have that same connectivity. So.
Got it. And Troy, what about you over at Wild Brain?
The big adaptation for us was, you know, we had 700 and change people, 700 and so people, and they all had unique setups at home. You know, we had some people who had one bedroom in a basement suite, and they had roommates, and they were piggybacking off their landlord's Wi-Fi and trying to accommodate a workflow where we could move data back and forth for them versus people who are at home. They can plug right into their router and set up a Teradici or a software client or a VPN into the studio, transfer data that way. So trying to accommodate those various ways of working. Different roles have very different demands in terms of the data they need to move back and forth, the demand for color accuracy and for you know, frame accurate timing for judging animation. A lot of different circumstances to adapt there, and just being able to accommodate, you know, the vast different set of circumstances that our people had.
For sure, totally understand that. Ken, what about some of the stuff that you've had to adapt to?
Well, you know, we had a bit of we do a lot of kind of work with AWS, and we've been kind of experimenting with virtual stations for quite a while, and a lot of the underlying tech, whether it was Teradici and we also had, you know, certainly, you know, some experience in kind of working remote with some of our team members who unfortunately weren't able to kind of be in the office with the rest of the team. And we kind of, you know, I think for us, it was, you know, we had kind of the ingredients and what we needed to do to kind of work remote. It was just a question of figuring out what method we had. And you know, we were kind of, maybe not to say paranoid, but, you know, we certainly kind of started to see the writing on the wall. We have one of our kind of partners is based in China, and they kind of gave us kind of a kind of real week-to-week update as to kind of what was happening. So, you know, we started kind of like moving and testing to kind of roll something out company-wide, you know, in a relatively quick manner. And you know, to be honest, it was the night that the NBA kind of called off their season. We just kind of said, okay, it's go time. So we you know, we sent everyone home on Friday and said, you know, we'll be in touch with you on Wednesday with login IDs and everything like that. And we basically went back and kind of just ran out with a couple of methods. You know, we had our team in Toronto who were on, you know, we have a direct connect in our office in Toronto. So, you know, we started running virtual stations in Toronto, and then in Winnipeg, where, you know, we're kind of in the middle of Canada here. It's not necessarily the most, you know, connected kind of city, but we basically VPN into the office, and people started leveraging their existing machines. And then it was a question of kind of replicating that home work environment. And it was just you know, experimentation with different tools to really kind of, you know, replicate, say, pen sensitivities and all those other kind of elements that people were used to having within the office that we wanted to make sure that they had at home. Because, you know, I think ultimately we see this as, you know, something that's going to probably last for a while, but also I think also something we had wanted to do as a company, you know, and become kind of, you know, experts in being able to do this, to adapt and grow. Because, you know, our whole kind of mantra at Tangent has been really trying to take expenses off of production budgets and get them up on screen. And clearly, you know, brick and mortar is one of those kind of pieces that you want to get off that kind of budget, and you can put into the screen, you know, and it was very much in line with what we were planning to do, and it just helped to kind of accelerate it. And I think, you know, certainly a lot of things that COVID has done is just really forced a lot of change and opened up minds as to how to kind of do things differently. And you know, between that and you know, I think we also had just switched to Microsoft Teams. So, you know, creating kind of a collaborative environment across kind of all of our offices and departments and functional groups for different shows. It was a pretty, you know, relatively seamless transition, I would say. So
great. Just what you were talking about with the NBA there, kind of being that goalpost, that, you know, there were going to be major changes in consumer behavior going forward because of COVID. How do you kind of see changes in social norms affecting how we're engaging with, like, the final content that's being produced? You know, like movie theaters, increase in streaming, even Chuck, with location-based entertainment, you know.
Yeah.
How does all that kind of stuff tie in?
Anytime I can quote Bob Dylan, I will. And there's a quote that I actually read today, of all things, using my Calm app, my little meditation app, which is how I start my days. And the quote is, "There's nothing so stable as change." And you know, like Jessica, you and I were talking about how if you resist the wave, you take a bigger beating. How do you go with it? And I think that's that's how we're having to pivot. That's how we're having to replicate the studio environment into the new work from home environment. And as it relates to the experience of consumer behavior, it's the same thing. Unfortunately, I think this was a shocking pivot for everybody. But I think if you go through something challenging, you've got to find the new way of thinking and working. If it's true that it takes 3 months to change a habit, then 3 months. And right now, though everybody really enjoys a big theatrical experience, I think the big stadium experience is going to be a challenge for a while. I think the boon is going to be for more of the premium theaters that already have, seating that's a premium seating. And then you add streaming to that. The trajectory of that has been undeniable. And then finally, you add one more change, which was how SVOD in movies that were supposed to go theatrical run first, though triggered by the times we're living in and that no theater is physically open. If you add all that up, I think it's going to be changed that of more of a multi-consumption strategy, that meeting the consumer where they're at, because we love streaming. I mean, at the end of the day, there are things to love about all of them, and whether they're saying it or not, all of those things are being explored and considered, and I think that's going to be the change. I think the entire experience is going to change. Anything that requires a lot of people in one spot has to evolve. So,
absolutely. Yeah, Troy, Ken, did you have anything you wanted to add in there too?
Well, I think one of the interesting things was, obviously the shutdown had a disproportionate impact on live production and kind of downstream to some of the visual effects houses, whereas in animation, it's really only kind of expanded things. We've been growing. We're at a point now where we can no longer fit back in the building that we evacuated when this thing hit. So I think that there's always demand, and it shifts depending on what's going on. If you can't go to NBA games or movie theaters, then demand for streaming content, things that you can do at home, increase. And I think you're seeing an increased interest in enhancing those kinds of content and making them more interactive and more customizable to kind of satisfy some of the demand that isn't being met in other venues.
How do you think that's kind of shaping the industry as we know it?
I think generally you're going to see an increase in bespoke experiences where it focuses on personalizing and customizing the experience for people however they want to sort of experience it, and to make it more personally engaging for them. I don't know what that means, but I think that particularly when people are kind of at home or not able to gather in large groups, some need for greater interactivity and personalization in the material is going to emerge.
For sure. And it sounds like it kind of also opens up the opportunity for kind of cross-platform type of options too.
Exactly. Yeah, different views of.
I apologize. I unfortunately can't really hear Troy too much, so I don't want to kind of talk over him or anything like that. But
no, you go ahead.
I'll try and be polite and wait my turn. But yeah, from our perspective, we came from kind of more of an independent film production route, and I think the trend in the marketplace towards streaming and the direction theatrical is going with being more of a tentpole driven event, and just the general cost of it all. I think this is certainly going to turn things on its head with regards to kind of like pushing more stuff towards streaming, and and ultimately, maybe the larger studios will you look at, say, what Trolls, whether the performance of Trolls and the direction that is going, it might possibly open back up the kind of independent market more, because it just be from an independent film standpoint, it was very difficult to compete in the theater with some of the bigger kind of shows, and now with streaming, it's taking kind of a lot of that kind of push away, and the kind of slowing down of theater for quite a while. Hopefully it'll maybe open the back door back up to more independent production again, and having a more variety of content, as opposed to just kind of the main studio kind of brands and lines. So
can I add to that? I agree 100%. I think it's weird to look back in time and think about who was consuming animated content. You had all the networks and Cartoon Network on the television, everything, and then you have the big studios. And then 2 years later, this is the big, Warner Brothers, Paramount, all these big studios. But now you've got Netflix and all the other streamers. You've literally doubled the demand for content in a short period of time to be consumed. And I agree with Ken. It's like this gives an opportunity for more of the moderately priced budgets and content of indie to find a home, I think. One comment on the location-based entertainment stuff. Troy, you'd mentioned that, like the bespoke experience. We do a lot of theme park content, so the challenges in that space are, again, a bunch of people consuming something in an experiential way. Some of the trends I think we will see are, what is that pre-experience and what's that post-experience? How can they extend the overall experience to start at home in whatever way, whatever form that is? And then also, once they leave, part of the experience, the dependency of that experience pays off in a home experience. And VR, where VR and AR have been going back and forth of which is more prominent, VR mixed in with an LBE is a really great experience too. So it'll be super interesting in that space to see.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So just in talking about some of the tool sets or the newer additions to tool sets that are being used, there's the idea of like virtual art departments to kind of help expedite the creative process, especially within these COVID type times. Have you found the need to kind of accommodate that kind of idea of like a virtual art department to help in the process?
Well, I think it's part of it. Certainly in the animation field, it's probably a function of the growth and demand of the business right now, in that, it's just very difficult to staff, especially art departments, say all in Los Angeles. You have, someone like Netflix who is, has their creative hub, and they've got a 40 plus projects up and running, and that's a huge demand on that key art layer. And I think a lot of the projects are starting to kind of look for other markets where they can kind of tap into kind of art capabilities, and of course that means some level of virtualization across that. And I think certainly we tend to concentrate a lot of our art in Toronto, but certainly, and I'm not sure kind of what the other kind of speakers kind of experience is. If you have multi facilities, often you're kind of very much spread out and you're working in a very collaborative environment. But for us, we're always very much collaborative with the production, and we have one production in LA, another one in Portland, and you are kind of virtualized at that point too, because we are kind of sharing a lot of art component parts and participating in the process, as opposed to just being kind of and for us it's we're not just like a typical vendor where we get sent material. We actually do quite a bit of the art as well too, so we do have to collaborate. And I think the whole we haven't really missed a beat with that, because that's just been the way we've always operated. It's just the way our projects have rolled out. So
yeah, we've seen, we're primarily focused or located in Vancouver, though we have a small LA operation, and our headquarters is in Toronto, so there's some reviews with people there. But I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is having developed workflows that can accommodate people in these various circumstances, and when the latency or the bandwidth of their connection is reduced to a certain point, it is as if they are far away anyway. And so we've taken kind of an approach to say, all right, well, let's just go after the best people wherever they are. Let's just get anybody we can and kind of adapt these workflows to getting them in the thing. I think the review process has been one of the most interesting, and there's some positive kind of surprises that have come out of that, and just some challenges in moving data around and getting everybody to review at the same time. It can be a little unwieldy, but it really has opened up the notion of what's possible. Like Chuck was saying earlier, we wouldn't have done a lot of these things if this hadn't happened. But it's opened up a lot of possibilities now that it has.
Yeah, for sure.
If I can add on that topic, especially art, I agree that's an area, Netflix and a lot of, especially Netflix, they have a really big department that have story and art, and they're developing their projects, and so there's an absence of talent out there because a lot of the talent is being attached on multiple projects, and so pre-COVID, one of the challenges we kind of grew up working remotely, and we knew our tool sets that we created are tuned towards that. And I think it's not just about the tools; it's about a mindset. It's about how you can effectively create in that same environment virtually. Some people, it's a much more of a challenge. They crave there's that interactivity that's important. But I think for us, what the challenge was we were always open for that, but there's always a concern about security, not for just ourselves, but also from our clients. Like anybody remote in a process, it was a challenge for our partners to really trust. We've gone through everything. We'll talk about this a little bit later, I know, but that was something that put a governor on our ability to accelerate that a bit. Now, with a proof of concept happening, and the security departments of all the studios being satisfied, protocols are in place. It has opened up the democratization of artists in a lot of different areas of the field, so that we can, to your point, Troy, find artists in other areas that might have been hard to convince our partners of, right? Because it's working.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a really great point about the people. So maybe let's switch gears from workflow to more of the workplace. And I just want to ask, what the whole talent acquisition process is like for you guys, like recruiting and onboarding. How are you doing that in a virtual type environment, and making sure that the people have the skills that they need to be able to be creating the content that they are?
It's interesting in one sense. I mean, like I said, we're casting a much wider net now. We're looking at people at much broader kind of geographical distribution. But we've also had to add elements to our onboarding to go, all right, what kind of connectivity do you have? What's your situation? Can you run these speed tests for us and sort of send back your data for it? A lot of the younger ACM SIGGRAPH webinar on working from home for the animation and visual effects industries.
Deja vu.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody's playing the greatest hits. But a lot of these people don't, they just have a phone or an iPad and a data plan. They don't have Wi-Fi necessarily or a router or connectivity. So it's kind of raised a lot of issues there. Yeah.
For sure.
I'll add, there's two parts to that comment or question, which is training and onboarding. I'll start with onboard or recruiting, then training and onboarding. On the recruiting side, not much has changed, because recruiters are combing the world for great talent and reviewing their portfolios and their work, and their pre-vetting, so that department supervisors and leads can look at the types of artists that are. But the one thing in recruiting is going to be, that's a huge challenge, is being present at the big conferences. That you're recruiting at CTN, you're recruiting at ANSI, and that is going to be, you can't replicate. Even though ANSI's doing that right now with MIFA, remotely, they're really being proactive to figure out how do you try to do that. I think that's a tough one. On onboarding and training, kind of the way we've always looked at it is we have kind of a wiki approach to the idea, which is all soups and leads, everybody in our company that are in a position of leadership. They have a training section that they access through Insight, our tool, and ultimately what they're doing is they're submitting their own training videos and commentary, and we're aggregating this in departments and in individuals. So we're also moderating it to make sure that it lines up. So a lot of our access to training tools, though, there's obviously the physical element of being with a super leader. We were already in a kind of a virtual way of doing that anyways. It's just become more prevalent. You know, we've actually gone in and reorganized things so that somebody that's coming on can accelerate faster in the kind of the training part of our wiki is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. So I had a question come in just quickly from Brenda Bailey, who I believe is with DigiBC, and she was just asking how have you tracked productivity changes since working from home? Like we're talking about, you know, onboarding new people. How are we tracking what has worked and what hasn't throughout this whole process?
Well, a lot of what we do is still, you know,
Well, you know,
for lack of a better word, quota
I think
based.
for us, you know, we've just used our traditional kind of like, you know, productivity tracking methods. But, you know, I think what has kind of changed from the work of home environment is that I think, you know, because there is a greater reliance on communication within departments and then cross departments, is that I think there's a much greater attentiveness of, you know, our leads and supervisors to really connect with every person in the office and every person in their department. And consequently, you know, when you start seeing that there's issues, and, you know, it allows kind of for our HR team to kind of go in and start to kind of like discuss and, you know, understand what maybe some of the topics are. If it's a question of like, you know, just, you know, people are tired, frustrated of being at home or whatever, it kind of like it, you know, we're able to kind of like address a lot of these issues. And it's kind of, I find it strange, but it's just like, you know, we have ever since, you know, the days are kind of very intense when you're kind of on kind of like Teams calls, like, you know, hours and hours and hours. But I think from a knowledge and understanding and feel for the business, you certainly have a very in-depth feel because you have those regular meetings with people constantly, and you're kind of getting a real feel for the pulse. So, you know, consequently, I think, you know, from our standpoint, our productivity has been excellent, and I think our you know, a lot of that goes to certainly the people on the crew who are very eager to kind of continue to kind of like push on the shows and make sure that we're doing this, and you know, we're trying to kind of create an environment, you know, despite everyone being at home, you know, like we're dealing with two different markets. You know, Toronto is I think a much more, you know, impacted by COVID because there's much tighter restrictions in Ontario. Manitoba is a little more flexible, so, you know, we are able to kind of, people can work from home, but, you know, they can still then go out a little bit more and have that activity. So, you know, it's just, I just think that the cadence of the regular check-ins and that kind of those first couple of months of working from home, we established kind of good practices of that regular communication, and that was really kind of the glue that's kind of helped ensure that kind of productivity kind of comes along with that as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that just quickly. I think as you said, Ken, that first couple months was critical. We felt like we needed to be counselors and therapists in a positive way, and listening and tuned into the anxiety that everybody had in what was coming around the corner, and you know, and with that, trying to be extremely fluid about how we interact with our team. And, you know, I'll hand it to our soups and leads and everybody. We told them right out of the gate, anything's open for discussion in how we can, I call it micro communication, which is the small moments of communication that you have with your team, and not waiting for the big, you know, town hall call or the big review session. What are the micro communications that you have with each of the artists and meeting them at their challenges? We too, productivity was surprisingly high. In fact, we're on, and we're actually ahead on some things because a groove has happened. I think in a weird way, if you look at a CFO's perspective of, you know, like time, how much time are people putting, you know, in, that's kind of an old school approach. It's not about time, it's about the quality of the time. And I think being at home and taking a quick break and making a grilled cheese for your son, or taking your dog out for a walk, or whatever comes with the territory, is incredibly helpful because it provides a break, and there's such value in that. And I think that we're seeing that in how productivity is tracking.
Absolutely. It's, you know, that social connectivity, or that the glue that
Right.
Ken was alluding to as well. You know, very, very important. And it's a part of that whole ecosystem type of mindset. You know, working from home isn't just a displacement in that people aren't physically working in the building. You have a whole ecosystem that you're essentially repositioning outside of a physical building. So maybe this might be a good segue into the question of what distinguishes one studio from another when physical environments and natural interactions between us all are changed so significantly.
Yeah, the notion of what makes a studio's culture unique. You know, what kind of, when you're not gathered together, when it's just people disparately, so loosely associated, what is the kind of the magic sauce, and how does it work? And I think it still comes down to how we treat each other and how we talk to each other, and the tone that comes from the top, like Chuck said, you know, these micro communications, this attention to detail. You know, referring back to the earlier question, in terms of measuring productivity, we got very quickly to the high 90s again. But some of the smaller issues were people who had, you know, problems at home, who were either emotionally not prepared for this kind of a situation, or had a bad environment where there's, you know, lots of kids or another partner that's working in the space, and it just makes it very difficult. And being attentive to those kinds of things, if you have a culture that has brought people together, and, you know, where you're attentive and treat each other with respect, then that came out of those conversations, and you were able to resolve those issues. And I think that's still the thing that distinguishes one studio from another, one place from another, is those intangible characteristics. Even when you've left behind, you know, the trappings with the posters and the foosball tables and the breakfast cereal buffets.
That's right on. I mean, that's to me, that's you know, I kind of, the way we look at culture. In fact, I won't say with who, but I was on a panel and I had a debate with somebody with a pretty large studio, and he took issue with a comment I had about culture. And my comment was, culture can't be created, right? It can be encouraged and supported. Our job in a leadership thing is just don't screw it up. Meaning, yes, you have culture, you have tenets and a cult, you know, core tenets that you put into place that have made any of the people on this call today, you know, involved in a successful company. That's how it starts. But as you grow, one of the things that we've tried to do, haven't always been successful, is to manage that from above. No, not good. To support it from below and let it be organic, and make it feel that the culture, though following our core tenets are important, you also have to have the flavor of the people within the studio, or it's going to feel like a corporate edict. You know, I would say that we have 3 studios. They're all different. So we try to support global, but we also encourage the local flavor, probably more than the global. And the last thing I would say is that as people are at home, you know, the idea of imperfections and not having a perfect work environment, and, you know, all the things, we not only embrace it, but we encourage it. We love when my producer has a cat tail behind her head, you know, or a kid walks across the screen. To me, I think that's really interesting, because it stripped the veneer of, you know, the more of a corporate mentality down to the reality of who we are in our own place. And I think that's been an incredible change. That you know, you look at Zoom, right? We're all equal. You know, it's not one of the Zoom things aren't bigger than. And when you look at every review, and when you get on it, they're all, that's the way it's, you know, there it is. And you can't delineate who's an executive or a lead. We're all pushing towards the same idea. And I say, if there's one thing that that's been exciting, is to see that. So,
For
sorry,
sure.
I went a little left turn on that, but.
No, not at all. And I'll just add too that, you know, like even in talking to my teams and a lot of the people that I interact with in a virtual space, like in a Zoom type setting, people have found that that level of equality is the same across the board as well. So it's not, you know, it's not partial to any one industry or any one studio or what have you. You know, it's kind of across the board, just kind of democratizes the platform to speak, I guess you could say.
That doesn't stop at your own studio people, but when you're on a review and you're with your partner clients, there they are too. And it's
exactly,
it's a great visual snapshot of how we should look at life and how we should look at our companies, how we should look at shows, and you know,
the holistic view.
It is,
if you will.
Yeah.
I think just to add here, we seem to be having some technical difficulties with Ken's feed. So we'll try and get him back into the loop, but we'll carry on with the conversation without him for now. Sorry,
Okay.
Ken. Just quickly, just as we're talking about culture and onboarding, there was a question that came in from Shiva, just saying that they're a recent animation grad and they wanted to ask, what do you think would be advice for recent graduates looking for job placement, especially during this time?
Well, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. I think your reel is still everything. I mean, you know, I always joke to new grads, I've spoken to a couple groups over the years, that the network of people that you know and that can vouch for you as a good person to work with, and your work itself, your reel, are really the things that you want to get out of your school experience. And I think those are still true. You know, the different experiences, your network of people will be different, and their perception perhaps shaped by, you know, whether you've worked online together on projects versus being in the same place. Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, I don't know. But I think those are still the key things.
And I have two comments. Number one, I had a recruiter with a very big company, let's just say that, once tell me that if the reel doesn't catch this person in the first 10 seconds, it's off. I mean, they're looking at reel, meaning, and the other thing I'll say, and this comes from our own experience, is that when we were putting our reels together, especially back when we were just growing and, you know, we didn't have any real visibility in the industry and we were trying to make a mark for ourselves. We have reels too. We're graduates. We were a graduate of, you know, 25 years ago when we started the company, and we were knocking on doors. So one thing that probably the most painful lesson, you know, we had as a company was often we had a reel that we wanted to put on all of our work, or, you know, because maybe we were partial to it. But here's one thing that one piece of advice. It doesn't matter how long your reel is. It doesn't, you know, but whatever the low mark is on there, like one clip, that is the mark of perception out there. Meaning you can have a bunch of great stuff, but if you have one piece that without the context of why it's on there, that can affect the perception, because just put your best work. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't have other reels or something, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Put your best work first and leave them wanting more. That's.
And the other thing I would say is, I'll say this all the time. Of course, you know, it's a different world when you have internships, or you know, we have a different way of looking at that. But any chance that you can collaborate right now is a perfect time to collaborate with other people that are aspiring grads that, you know, want to do something. The proof's in the pudding. You know, we were having a hard time finding entertainment work because we didn't have anything in the show way back. And so we finally, you know, as a studio, we decided, hey, let's just do a little test, a short. It's now online, but back in 1997, this tells you how long ago it is, we did a little tiny short called The Man on the Moon, which was with William Joyce, a children's book author. And it ultimately became Rise of the Guardians over at DreamWorks. It sold to them. We were a tiny little company, and we're like, how do we prove that we can do something? And so we just put our money where their mouth is. We had a render farm, which was made up of 25 computers from my grandma, my brother, all cobbled together. You know, it was duct tape and spit. But what it showed was passion, and it showed, you know, something that's really interesting. So I would encourage that. Find ways to collaborate.
Excellent points. So we're talking a lot about, you know, culture, onboarding, people, dynamics, connections. How is the social element of an organization being retained throughout this whole situation? We have, I'm sure Zoom is, part of the normal vocabulary now. Everybody knows how to use it. You can, if somebody doesn't have a camera on during a video meeting, you automatically think like, oh, okay, Zoom fatigue, or, oh, that person didn't brush their hair this morning, like little things like that, or using virtual backgrounds. Like how is that kind of helping to encourage that culture building throughout an organization?
I think it's kind of the remote equivalent of, at the studio, people decorate their workspaces, their office, or their cubicle. They got their action figures and their posters and their, whatever. And now people do the same thing at home. It's kind of like the rate my Skype room thing. They've got their virtual backgrounds, they've got their cats, they send in pictures to our, kind of social media sites to kind of go, there's my working space with my cat and my, my dog at my feet, and there are Friday, drink get-togethers online, and the same kind of things that you have, in person, just variations on a theme.
Yeah, that's again, I kind of going back to, I think I made a comment earlier about trying not to be too corporate about it. I love HR. Anybody that's in HR, don't take my comment. But if it's being driven by HR, it's too corporate. meaning,
Yeah.
When we finally had an HR department, it was a good thing way back. But part of me is like, that's corporate. So if it's organic and it's coming from some really great ideas have come up, and we've just been encouraging, going, much like animation, some of the best animation in the world isn't about the stuff that's slick and beautiful. It's about the imperfections and the art and seeing the brushstroke of the artist, and that idea of the world that we live in. How do you apply that towards your home work environment? And like you were saying, Ken, I love that analogy of, it's much like owning your space in the studio. How do you do that? So we've had a lot of fun with it. Of course, that same thing, happy hours and yoga classes. We've also been encouraging their own art, using their art as the artists themselves and having art classes and art experiences. We've even started, I'm involved in this one, but I've become a Zoom DJ, so we have these client reviews and I'll pick a theme. And so as everybody's, how that weird, awkward, like, hey, let's talk just before the Zoom officially starts and stuff. So I've been doing soundtracks where I've got my music going up. Maybe it's a 60s day, and then I'll ask, and then people are supposed to guess it, and I'll actually fade it up, and then when it's ready, we're ready to start. The music fades down, and then as it wraps up, I bring the music back up and we do a fade out. I mean,
Chuck, I wish we would have known about this before. We could have done that as the lead-in. Actually, maybe get it set up now and we can do it as an outro.
Yeah, there you go. Somebody, I could do that. I'll pull up Spotify. So, how do you replicate the imperfections of just human interaction in the culture of your studio and do it virtually? And I think that's the spirit. So
it's been really neat just hearing all of you guys talk, because you're using words like, I think at the beginning, experimentation, dismantling, organic, ecosystem. There's a lot of like adaptation, evolution, those kinds of uses of words to explain this particular situation. It just shows, I think, that there's kind of a global push for like a unified front, in that we've never faced anything like this, as a company, as a country, as a global economy kind of thing. We're all working through these things all at the same time, at the same pace, at the same level, which is really encouraging. So I guess I'm kind of curious, we're talking about the things that we've had to adapt to by working from home. What kind of things do you see maybe translating into a physical workspace? Or is it going to be like a hybrid of, some virtual, some back to normal?
So are you talking about like how we transition back into studio life, or that?
Yeah, studio life or just life in general, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, I was once told about, relationships are like a red piece of clay and a blue piece of clay. And when you squish them together and make it one clay, and then they separate, you can't separate it without some of the blue staying on the red and some of the red staying on the blue, okay? So right now, the blue clay of working from studio, the red clay of, they're stuck together. So you can either look at it as, oh, gross, I got some red on my blue or whatever, or you can look at it and say, what is the takeaway from the work from home that'll apply? And everything you just said, Jessica, about the ability to adapt and change and involve that, we're already being very proactive on it, and we're trying to communicate to our staff that we don't have all the answers yet, but how it looks could take the form of a phased readaptation, departmental. So we're already exploring the things to just be sure the team knows where our heads are at. Is there going to be a version of remote? How can there not be? Well, is that a challenge to address? Certainly. You can't have everybody remote. So the dance and the challenge is going to be, how do we adapt what is working for our team members, but also is aligned with the requirements of serving our creative partners and our studios with great content. And that's kind of the filter you have to look at. So I think it's exciting to see how that looks, but it's going to be weird and complicated at the same time. So
for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's no going back to the status quo. It won't be a return to exactly like how things were before. It's going to be phased, and there are going to be stages as we work through the pandemic, and until the vaccine or herd immunity emerges, at a large scale. But we were looking for space to expand before this hit, and I don't believe we will in the future. I think we'll just kind of accommodate by having teams and certain disciplines and people who are so motivated to work from home and deal with the kind of expansion and contraction of the studio population that way. And because you can't argue anymore. It's like Chuck just said, you can't argue that it doesn't work. Like, well, we can't have everybody working from home. Yeah, you can. Just did it. It's not necessarily how you want to go for the future for everybody. It's nice to have the option, but I'm not missing the commute. I don't know how some of the folks in Toronto feel about it, but yeah, I'm not missing that part at all. I'm missing seeing people and the casual conversations. But if you can work out a sort of a part-time thing or a like the schools are doing with cohorts where different groups come in, I think the future is going to be some mixed bag of approaches for sure.
Yeah, definitely a mixed bag. So
yeah, great points. I wanted to ask quickly, just you both have touched on the idea of internships throughout this conversation at some point. How are you dealing with internships in a virtual type of environment? Is that something that you're not going through with for the foreseeable future, kind of on hiatus?
No, we actually shipped machines to interns in Toronto out of Sheridan. Because we were impressed with what they'd done, and we wanted to engage them, and we wanted to get them into our environment. Obviously our machines are all fitted out with our security measures and stuff, so they can be part of our production environment without causing a security risk. And it's a pretty small scale program, but I think it's important to stay connected.
Yeah, and I'll say for us, we called our internship program, we called apprenticeship programs, so it was a bit of a different approach, a little bit more intimate. Not to say that others aren't intimate, but we kind of looked at it as something that they were not only being involved, paired with somebody in their own department and learning through the internship natural flow, but also that we gave them a shot to work on an actual project, so that at the end of the day, they have their name in the credits and they have something they can point to. And that is as motivating as anything else. We've, during this particular time, had to downshift that, but we were planning on bringing it back simply because of the obligations that we had and the complexities of the 3 films. Our primary thing was to be sure that the core team was set, and which they are, and now we're transitioning back into incorporating it, because there too, where we'd get inquiries for internships, a lot of that was dependent upon a city they were in or location, and what about the expense of moving. So our thought process is reinventing that now of, wow, internship opportunities can be more global and can take the shape of, can be reshaped during COVID to be something that, and somebody that's looking for an internship has more access to more studios, right? So.
Definitely. And it speaks really well just, in taking that kind of initiative to keep, like Troy, what you're saying, being able to package up actual physical hardware to be able to accommodate the situation that we're in. It speaks to the high quality content that's being created, and adhering to keeping that ecosystem intact for building organizational culture too. So that's really encouraging to hear. We mentioned beforehand as well, just talking about some of the bigger conferences that are happening and the idea of them being fully virtual. Chuck, you were talking about some of your talent acquisition teams, and how obviously recruiting at conferences is a really big draw, and it's an opportunity to have those conversations with prospective candidates. What does a virtual conference look like now in that respect?
Well,
what do big conferences look like in general?
I mean, there's so many. There's all kinds of conferences that I love. Called Spark is amazing. And you have the larger ones like ANSI. You have the more, not the traditional, but CTN, which is more focused on the art. So you have all these incredible conferences that are sitting out there, and I don't know the answer to that, to be quite honest with you. We go to ANSI all the time. We have a massive recruiting effort there where we participate in panels or presentations, and so fortunately we've been interacting with the festival directors, and pretty early on about ideas. We threw ideas out there. We as they did with other studios I know, and they've rolled out what I think is a really interesting overall virtual conference that hopefully we can all look to and see if it succeeds. It's just starting, and right now, even though we're all supposed to be in ANSI soon, the way they've rolled it out doesn't feel any different than the rollout of the physical, thing. The one thing you're gonna miss, I mean, for me, the conference is the most valuable part of the conference is sitting down for a cup of coffee or having a meal with somebody, or those unplanned meetings of 3 or 4 or 5 people, from all walks of life having conversations. And, that's going to be absent for a while until it isn't. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. I don't know. I didn't answer anything there. That was more reflective, I guess.
Well, I mean, that was the point of the question, I guess.
Yeah.
Conferences, everything's virtual right now. What have your experiences been like? What do you like? What do you not like?
Right now, I like how ANSI has rolled everything out and applied everything that we've learned as a community in the work from home thing to a conference, and everything from being able to share and watch a movie together to, conversations like this, and so far so good.
Troy, have you been to any virtual conferences?
I have not really. We had there's some friends I get together with every year when we're at NAB, and we had NAB drinks online with Zoom while the show was on, which was nice. And it's people that I don't normally see. They're from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, and we've worked together over the years, so it's nice to have that. But like Chuck said, it's serendipity that you miss. It's the chance encounters or the dinners or the parties where, oh hey, I didn't know you'd be here. or, you know, oh, you met so-and-so, he's working on something similar to you. Just the happenstance of mixing people up in an environment like that. I don't know how you create that. I mean, I've seen some great, you know, NVIDIA had some really great keynotes recently from their conference. And so the presentation materials, I've even been working with one vendor who's arranging online drinks. They're shipping stuff to your house and you're all getting together at the same time to go through stuff, kind of schmoozy, but you know, they're trying to recapture some of that. And I think a lot of that will work and a lot of that will transfer, but I don't know how you capture the serendipity of, you know, the chance encounters on the show floor or at, you know, various gatherings. That I already miss.
There's an interesting, as you're talking, there's an interesting observation that I've even kind of in my own head applied. I've signed up for a bunch of, like we're having this today, right? This is a live conversation. And I don't know how you approach it, like when you actually, if this recorded content, how soon it's available. But in my head, there's been a couple other live events that I wanted to participate in, but something schedule-wise kind of got in the way, or I needed to take my kid. And then in my head I said, oh, don't worry, it'll be available online soon, right? And so, I don't know, I'm just speaking out loud, which is, how do you make sure that the live event there's a motivation not only to participate because of the topics or the conversation or what's being, but that maybe it's not available for a while, so catch it while it's live or something. It's a little bit of like the distribution quandary of releasing something online versus waiting for theater. I don't know. That's answering a question with a question too, which is I found myself not driving myself to certain live events because I know that I can check it out later.
We don't have very much FOMO going on, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry, was my mic active again, or is it?
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, all right.
I wanted to ask, you know, just with all the terminology that has been building up throughout this entire time, you know, we have things like unprecedented, social distancing, contact tracing, outbreak. I'm curious if you guys have a term that, you know, you're now adopting into everyday language, or if there's something that, you know, as the whole COVID situation kind of tapers off, you never want to hear ever again.
All of the above.
I would say paradigm shift, but I didn't want to hear that before this all happened either.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Well, the word pivot is used a lot. Let's just, you know, we've all used it. I've overused it. You know, for us, the whole idea of the micro communication is something that we just kind of talk about, and I'm sure that will be overused. It probably already is if you ask some of the people in the studio, but you know, I guess the idea is, you know, how do you describe the emotion of what we're going through in a way that summarizes it in a single word, and whatever that is right, you know, for each studio. So
for sure. And that's a great point, actually. I had not heard the idea of micro communication before you brought it up in the context that you did. So thanks for sharing that bit.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that kind of brings us to time here. I'm just going to wrap it up with a little bit of notation here, and of course going to thank Troy, Chuck, and Ken for participating in this panel. It's been a lot of fun, and I would love to talk with you guys again for sure.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.
So just as we wrap this up, again, this has been the second installment in a series of webinars organized by the Canadian ACM SIGGRAPH chapters with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. It's part of an ongoing series, which will continue throughout the year, and we'll be covering a variety of topics of interest to the SIGGRAPH community throughout them. And also a reminder, just in what we were talking about earlier, SIGGRAPH 2020 is going to be one of those fully virtual conferences that you can check out. It'll give the opportunity to enjoy a top-tier conference in computer graphics and interactive techniques from the comfort of your own home. So stay tuned on the ACM SIGGRAPH channels through social media for any updates and info about future upcoming webinars. So having said that, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, all.
That's the Zoom wave, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know what's funny is we've been trying to do it, but it doesn't work really, where I can take a beer and pass it to you or go cha-ching. It's complicated, you know.
We'll do that for the next one.
Yeah, I did. I tried that with my daughter, which she was amazed with passing a pen. And then I had my buddy on the other side pull a pen off screen. And it was,
What?
It's
like,
the simple thing. Actually, we should try that right now. Anybody got a pen?
Yeah, I got a pen.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm terrible with the camera.
Okay. Oh, wrong side. It's not mirroring. Got it.
There you go. Well, nice to chat with you all.
Yeah, nice
Sure.
chatting.
I hope that was okay and that it
Great.
flowed okay.
All good.
You know, it's really interesting
You know, but
I apologize. I don't know
in
what
the
happened
idea
there.
of like a virtual context. You don't get that immediate in-person kind of intangible feedback.
right.
Yeah.
Like I can't see that, you know, somebody's foot is twitching underneath the table, or I can't see them, you know, rapping knuckles
Yeah,
on the table. Kind of.
I found the same thing when I was moderating the last panel. It's different when you're looking at them at the side and being able to take the cues. But
Yeah.
good job. Well,
You did a great job.